if you start something, you better care about the problem you're trying to solve. Otherwise, you'll get bored and you'll drop out after a while. That's one. Second thing I've learned is that the art of all of this is it's all about execution. Like I hear so many people come and tell me, this competitor is doing this, the competitor is doing that. Like none of that actually matters. What really matters is the thing that you're trying to do. Are you able to keep iterating? Like whether you listen to customers, like the people who succeed very well, like the example you gave about the Warmly gentleman, like you open, close. That is the art of building, which is like you listen, you try something, you figure it out. Does it work? You iterate. Like execution is a huge amount of the challenge that you need to take on. It's not the original idea. And then the third one is that the team is everything. Like startups to me, like the team you build is the product you build is the company you build. It's so true.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today we're thrilled to have Amar Hanspal on the mic. He is a veteran of design software, former co-CEO and CPO at Autodesk, founder of Bright Machines, and now leading the charge at Motif, a startup reimagining tools for architecture, engineering, and construction. Amar, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, super excited to sit down with you today. I'd love to get your origin story for the audience. What's your background?
I grew up as a mechanical engineer. That's what I was trained to do. And I know it kind of sounds quaint that, I would talk about the 80s and stuff like that, but I kind of got introduced to using computers for engineering back in the 80s. And that kind of one thing led to another. And that's kind of how I got involved with CAD back in the late 80s. And in those days, it used to run on sort of what the people used to call microVAXs, sort of mini computers. They're still, sit in a closet and stuff like that. But I, did that at the university, kind of got hooked on it. PC started emerging. CAD got onto the PC. I ended up in California by accident and stumbled on Autodesk in '87 when it was a really small company with 250 people, just getting started, had one product, which was called AutoCAD at the time. I just kind of got hooked on that whole experience of, watching innovation, doing something on a disruptive kind of, PCs were very new and exciting at that time. And my first job was actually doing technical support. I used to take in the days of phone calls, I used to take 100 phone calls a day from customers. And, that was good training ground for not just understanding how people are using the software, but actually understanding how customers operate emotionally. Like how do you listen well? How do you kind of draw synthesis of, what's important to them? And in some ways, those were the dots that connected that led me to then do product management and business leadership. And that's kind of the snowball of what led me to what I ended up doing.
Yeah, I love that. Sitting on the phone 100 calls a day really creates a lot of empathy for the customer and how they're using it, what their problems are. It's a good place to start, I think, if you're 22, 23 years old and out of college and you don't know where to start. Support or sales is a really good place to start building that empathy.
Absolutely. 100% agree with you. And I think just so many stories from those days, very entertaining experiences, but I learned a lot. And I was fortunate to do that both in the United States and I had 2.5 years out in Europe. So it actually also exposed me to like a global reality of doing business around the world.
So what happened next?
There were 2 or 3 formative experiences for me in this, so when I did customer support for like 7 years, and that whole idea of like listening to customers led me to start doing product management. And this was in the mid 90s. And I just got put on a project that was of critical importance to the company. There's this, that time we were re-architecting the product that hadn't gone well, and the company was lurching into a bit of a financial crisis. And that product management experience for me was like a very fast way of like learning how to translate, bridging both sort of empathy with customers into creating value. Like there's no other way. Again, in 2.5 years, I just very quickly had to learn not only how you listen well, but how do you select well from everything that you're listening so you can come up with a win-win. And then in '99, my second experience, so that one was actually a successful experience. And they always say like you learn a lot more from your failures. So the next thing I ended up doing, I actually left Autodesk in the late 90s, and in the Web 1.0 world, 2 friends and I tried to build a in those days, online B2B kind of commerce company. 2.5 years, it was, again, learned a lot. We failed. We didn't get far enough. And that one taught me about sales. That experience was all about, like, as an entrepreneur, one of the things that you have to learn to do is ask for money. Because, in a large company, you have all these teams and functions, and you build the product and somebody else goes and sells it for you. In a small company, you are chief cook and bottle washer all at the same time, right? So we had the experience of not just having to build the product, but then going and showing it to a customer and say, will you pay us for this? And that was a really humbling experience. And that was my second really formative experience. And then what happened for me after that company folded in the first dot-com bubble that went down in early 2000s, was I came back to Autodesk and got put into a bunch of P&L roles, and sort of, started with a $5 million business that became 50, then got put on the $800 million business, then got put on the $2.5 billion business, and then on the entire company. That's sort of what.
Amazing. Yeah. And it sounds like that was maybe also a lesson in timing too, right? Because it sounded like, it's the internet. Hey, let's bring B2B commerce online, and not everyone was ready to transact like that probably at that point.
And yeah, you're absolutely right, Brian. It was not just, it was timing. It was also, you come up with ideas in, like, sitting around whiteboarding, but when you go ask a customer, they're like, that's not my problem. Like, this is my problem. And then you're trying to, like, pivot and all those kinds of things. And all of those learnings were good, but we ultimately ran out of time to be able to get it done.
Yeah, a couple of podcast episodes before you, Max was on from Warmly, and he talked about open and close periods, where you go into a close period and you're going to go after the idea, and you set a timeline, 30 days. And if you're not feeling the market pull, you switch and go to an open period where you kind of try out some other ideas, and then you go back into a closed period. I thought that was a really good analogy. He went through six pivots himself.
Wow.
Over 5 years before he really found product market fit. So what happened next? So did you guys actually raise some money for this startup?
Yeah. So as part of that startup experience, we raised $17 million. I always call it was my $17 million MBA. We learned a lot. Yeah. When the startup folded, we did return money to investors. We hadn't used it all up, so we did return. And then when I went back to Autodesk and started running those P&Ls, the project that sort of, and again, there were two projects for me that really were meaningful. One was what the investor world understands as our transition to subscription. So we were an on-premise company. On-premise for Autodesk was on desktop effectively. We, over the course of almost a decade, we tried to build products that were either cloud native or hybrid, like kind of, to support the overall goals of the company. And that was a really, really fascinating change management project to run a large product organization of 3,000 people through that change was a lot. And then as part of that, go after a completely new area that Autodesk didn't have any business in, which was construction. And, we were able to leverage mobile and web to go after a segment that we had not serviced previously. And that was the next thing that we were able to go to. So those were like really fun projects, which led me to the chief product officer role because of, we were able to pull this off. And then also the co-CEO of the company as we went into the next era.
Amazing. And then at some point you transitioned into Bright Machines. Maybe you could talk about that transition and how did that come about?
So in 2017, I left Autodesk. It has to do with the fact that we had an activist investor, and there were some.
I vaguely recall the news on that.
Yeah, there was a lot of discussions whether we keep going down the innovation route or optimize for business models. I was firmly in the innovation camp. Like, that's what I believed in driving growth. And so I left in 2017. And I think at that time, just that vector has continued to this day, is that there's so much new capabilities coming online. And at that time, I was very fascinated by computer vision. What I like saying is that in the mid-2010s, it became clear that computers could see in addition to computers being able to count. And so you're like, what problems can you go solve now that computers can see? And you look at Waymo today, autonomous cars, you look at drones and, flying objects. And so we got interested, Brian and I, in assembly lines, like manufacturing. And Bright Machines was a result of that. We got connected to this team in a manufacturing firm called Flextronics that was trying to deploy robotics in a scale. And a lot of the problems that they were having, we thought, okay, we can go solve using computer vision. Configuration, picking, placing, all of these things were vision-driven challenges. So Bright Machines was about giving, as I say, eyes and brains to robots. And that was a really fun project. We did that for 3 years. From 2018 to about the end of 2021. The company's still around. I decided to leave it and go back to the building industry. So we had done factories, and that's kind of what this current project is about. But that was my Bright Machines.
And so the current project is Motif. Maybe you could talk about that, the conception. What was your aha moment to start that?
The origin story of Motif is the following. I wanted to do something in the building industry because it's simply so important to humanity. I know that's kind of sounds a little grandiose, but the building industry employs the second largest number of people in the world. It's 23 million people who work in the building industry. Contributes 40% of greenhouse gases. It's got a huge carbon footprint. So if you start thinking about doing something good for the planet, the building industry is a great place to start. And for me, just where I'm in my career, I was like, I got one project left. I want to do something meaningful. I've had my fun in terms of, career and things like that. Let's go do something that has a, potential to have a big impact here. So we picked the building industry, and the more time we spent at it, and I'd spent a bunch of time at Autodesk, but it had been 7 years, and I came back to this industry and said, like, what's an unsolved problem here? And what became more and more clear to us as Brian and I investigated this, was that the design stack for buildings had not changed in 27 years, while the methods had evolved. So you had all these interesting buildings, new materials, new methods, new generation, but people were using things that were software systems that were designed in the late 90s, like 1998 was the state of the art. And I was like, that was what stood out to us. And then the more time we spent with modern cloud machine learning technology and tried to think through what we could do differently, it became clear that we could connect the dots, modernize the design process, as well as build something that could help people design better and address the challenges of today, which is what led us to Motif. Now, we're only 2 years, just over 2 years in our journey of, like, these things take 5-7 years to build. So I would say we're probably, our progress meter is 30% of the way through. So we have a lot left to do, but that's the journey we're on.
What are some of the core technical and UX challenges that you had to tackle first or are currently tackling?
First two that I think everyone can relate to is building industry is one that involves a lot of players. Like every project, you have an architect, you have a structural engineer, you have a contractor, you have specialty, acoustic. You have all these, like, just like in healthcare, you have like specialties that come together to take care of a patient. The building industry is the same way, which is you get a team together to build this building. And so the ability to share information easily is not something that people have access to today. So that's one of the technical challenges. The web is actually good at this, but to your user experience point of view, designing a user experience that just works well on top of that is not easy. So that's one challenge. Second, I would say that is a challenge of just engineering from an engineering perspective, is that while browsers are great for ease of use, they're not great at handling huge amounts of data. And if you think about a building and designing a building, you have lots and lots of data that you need to bring, to bear to the design process. So one of the other challenges we are tackling is how do you get huge amounts of data to work inside a small browser with, and deal with all of the latency of the internet and give a good experience. So those are a couple of the early challenges. There's many more that we're tackling that sound more nerdy if I get into it, where you talk about parametrics, and that starts becoming very domain specific, but those are just a couple of the big things that we have to go tackle.
It's interesting. If you look at the history of technology, we went from mainframes to terminals to, PCs on our desks back to kind of, mainframes with the browsers or terminal, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Exactly.
So who's the customer and kind of what problem are you kind of solving for them?
Right. I mean, the industry is very large, and it consists of architects and engineering firms, general contractors. We're beginning with architecture firms. So I think they are the origin of design. Every project starts with a sketch and early, what they call a massing model, and then it turns into a design. So those people are our first customers. Over time, we hope to serve many more people in the industry with a broader set of tools. We're starting with architecture firms, and our first product is really focused on the sharing of information. And the way I would describe it is, if you're used to whiteboarding tools like Miro for sharing, for whatever, creating mood boards and sharing stuff. Well, in the building industry, to share information, you have to make all of that work in 3D. So our first product is like a 3D Miro where you can bring in information from various data sources, create the project, recreate the project in a 3D digital form, and then do a bunch of like what people would call review. Like you're able to give feedback on these designs, spot problems, and things like that. That's our first product. That is, again, one of many that we're developing. The one that next one we will develop for the architecture team, firms of this world, is actually a modeling application where people can start to add things like walls, doors, windows, and things like that to actually create real building.
How do you kind of meet the architects where they are with the current tooling? Is it interoperable with existing
Yes.
formats and legacy platforms and AutoCAD and all that?
Yes,
Like
exactly.
where do you integrate or replace?
That's a great question. So we integrate really well. So interoperability was like one of the fundamental. We realized that we have to coexist with the existing tool set, and we are going to have to coexist for a relatively long time, because we're coming into an industry that's been using a set of tools for 27 years. They're not going to change over tomorrow. They'll take whatever, how many ever years it takes to change over. So yeah, we import information, we send information back, we interoperate from the get-go so we can be part of the ecosystem. Strategically, I try to phrase this as it's embrace and then replace. So you're taking on like you're becoming fitting into the workflow, and then hopefully getting the opportunity to do more for the customers. So they start using the traditional tool less and less. And, and you do it like, whatever analogy you want to use, like I don't like this one where people say you boil the frog, like you do it kind of like gradually take over the role of the main product.
Over time, you go back to the original legacy tool less and less and less.
Exactly.
Until the point where, wow, I've done the entire building in Motif and I haven't even gone back to my old tool.
Exactly. That is exactly.
And what is it about? Is it kind of like a cursor for design, basically? So it just helps you go faster and use AI?
Yeah, the analogy I'd use is it's a combination of Figma and Cursor for buildings. And when I look at Figma, it's like, listen, it's very accessible. The ease of use is there. It's web-based and it's collaborative. Like it's designed for that, the way of easy sharing and easy sort of creation. And the Cursor aspect of it is that it lifts the interaction model to being more intelligent, so that you're not doing things pick and click, pick and click, pick and click. You really can interact with the system and say, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? You're directing it as opposed to like micromanaging it. So that's the combination. And look, it's a vertical tool. So it's really only works for this particular domain. We tries to understand buildings and understand the topology, the practice, the constraints of buildings, and tries to make that experience comfortable.
How has go-to-market been for you? What's been challenging? Going from big company to small company, back to big company, back to small company.
I enjoy that. So, I mean, let me answer your question on go-to-market, Brian. I mean, we've been fortunate that customers have really welcomed us with open arms. We've been in market for 6 months. We've got lots of people engaging with us, giving us feedback, buying the product, using the product. So even this first step that we've taken has been met, very positively by customers. We're learning to do this at scale. So so far we've been doing it as, I would say human centric, like human in the loop, like everything we're doing involves a human. We're going to go to more automated, product led growth kind of style of doing this. Personally, I've enjoyed the variety of like working in a large company where you have the wonderful thing about a large company is all this infrastructure and customer base you can work with. But you've got huge amounts of challenges on aligning and driving humans. In a small company like ours, the alignment and sort of collaboration within the company is straightforward. It's the fun part. Everybody's got one mission. Yes, it's harder to go. You have to do so much yourself. You don't have infrastructure. You don't have customers. You've got to do all of that heavy lifting yourself. But on the other hand, it's really invigorating. I am drawn to innovation, and there's no better place than a small startup to go experience that.
Yeah, I'd love to get you further tug on that thread a little bit as someone who's been an exec at big companies versus a founder. How do you How do you adjust to that? And how would you advise maybe folks in their 20s and 30s listening to the pod to think about taking the leap and doing a startup versus continuing to, refine their skill set in a larger corporate structure? And yeah, what would you say to somebody in
I
that
mean, I can
situation?
talk for hours on that, Brian. I mean, what I'd say is that the things I've learned over the years, maybe I'll pick three things that I will emphasize. First is that, startups are easy to start and really hard to finish because, you can have an idea, and nowadays, especially with all the vibe coding tools and all, like you can get a prototype out and you might even get a couple of people who say that's cool, but to turn prototype into production code and then do all of this stuff around, like, oh, we need like this whole infrastructure and it needs to stand up 99.9%, it needs to be secure, and you have a customer who pays you so the site can't go down. Like that stuff becomes hard, and then you have to try and scale and find more customers. So the journey, when you decide to be an entrepreneur, you got to have it in you that you're not doing this for a quick flip. We all hear about a Lovable went from 0 to 500 million in like 2 days, but that's like the black swan event. The majority of startups is a grind. It's more like climbing a mountain than anything else. Like it's really a grind, and you kind of have to go through that. So you got to really care about the problem you're going to solve. So that's the way I would say, is that the one thing, and I'm not saying any of this to scare anyone out, is that if you start something, you better care about the problem you're trying to solve. Otherwise, you'll get bored and you'll drop out after a while. Okay, that's one. Second thing I've learned is that the art of all of this is it's all about execution. Like I hear so many people come and tell me, this competitor is doing this, the competitor is doing that. Like none of that actually matters. What really matters is the thing that you're trying to do. Are you able to keep iterating? Like whether you listen to customers, like the people who succeed very well, like the example you gave about the Warmly gentleman, like you open, close, like that is the art of building, which is like you listen, you try something, you figure it out. Does it work? You iterate. Like execution is a huge amount of the challenge that you need to take on. It's not the original idea. And then the third one is that the team is everything. Like startups, to me, Vinod Khosla says like the team you build is the product you build is the company you build. It's so true. The small teams, these are very much like if you're an NBA fan, it's like, that's it. You're 15 people on a court. Like that's it. And so you better get the right people on in that small roster that you have. Those are the three most important things to me, and the rest is you have to be personally have good high amounts of energy and a lot of curiosity and low ego. You're gonna get get beaten up a lot along the way, but the fun that you have, the thing that is really addictive about startups is that you watch things that are just ideas come to life in such rapid fashion that it just becomes like this thing of, I had this moment where a year after Brian and I started the company, we're sitting at a dinner with the team and we look down the table and there's all of a sudden 20 people there. Like, when did this happen? And then you have a customer, and then you have a company, and then you have investors, and all of a sudden this thing takes shape. And that's just, there's no feeling like it in the world.
That's amazing. So thinking about AI and ML for a sec, transforming architecture, engineering, construction, what are some realistic versus speculative bets and things you're making in this area? What are you excited about?
Yeah. So look, I think the thing about the path forward the AIML is, I think, twofold. One is, I think, finding the mundane problems to go solve, because architecture, engineering, and construction is filled with drudgery. Like, you think about the permitting process. Like, so okay, you think about architecture, you think, oh, you're this amazing Frank Gehry like designer coming up with this great idea. Like 90% of what happens with buildings is you got to produce 1,000 drawings, you got to review 1,000 drawings, you then have to stamp 1,000 drawings, you got to go to like that's the boring stuff. So I think the opportunity of the AI ML is actually to make all of that simpler rather than the flashy stuff. Like that's the first thing I would say. Second thing I would say is that you got to pay attention to where the foundation models are evolving, like the stuff that is becoming more possible. Like you watch the diffusion models get better, things like Nano Banana and all of these things showing up. And the more the foundation models are capable of handling stuff, the more you can do for this industry. And so the opportunity is really the gap between the mundane user problem that you've identified and what the foundation model does. And you create this sort of fine-tuning layer that connects those two. That's the thing that's what I think we're getting good at as a company. as Motif to go solve. The customers are helping us identify the problems. Our engineers are figuring out what the foundation models can do, and we're connecting those.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time. We have a platform shift, right? And you think about the tools that were built, 27 years ago, that was kind of the last platform shift, right?
Yeah,
It is
exactly.
software and cloud delivered software, internet. Then you had, mobile, I guess, but that wouldn't impact architects that much, this space as much. So really, it kind of makes sense that the tools are 20 plus years old because, the last platform shift happened that long ago. And,
Right,
and now you have
exactly.
AI. But to what degree, do you think, and I'm sure you wrestled with this question as you set out to do another startup, is like, maybe I just go back to a big company and build AI tooling into the existing platforms versus, hey, maybe this platform shift enables completely new tool sets.
So I picked door number two. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think the back to the strengths of a big company, you have customers, you potentially have access to data, but you're kind of constrained by the form factor of the tools that already exist. And you're watching people. I mean, the most striking contrast is like you watch ChatGPT versus Google. Like there's this whole tug of war is where are you going to get your questions answered? And there is something very addictive about going to ChatGPT and turning this into a conversation versus the Google search that we've been used to. And I think that when I thought about the design problem, for example, current tools are very geometry centric, right? If you think about the way people design buildings, like you're doing everything in shapes, you're doing a wall. And the reality of when you're doing design is that you're working in all of this context of building codes and site constraints and things like that. And so when you go with a clean sheet of paper, you can really expand your thinking to go attack a bigger set of problems. And that's why I picked door number two, is that let's go do something from the ground up, which lets us clean sheet of paper really. And I also believe I think the point you're making is, I do think the big leaps in capabilities have come when people have fundamentally reimagined and experienced. Amazon with retail is like one of the best examples of Netflix. Like, you just start with, like, Netflix didn't have a library of content. They had streaming that they started with and built it backwards, as opposed to the guys who had the content library and were trying to figure out how to stream it. So I think I'm just going for door number two. I was like, hey, how do you create an AI native experience for design? And then we'll figure out what geometry needs to do, as opposed to you've got geometry and now you have to figure out what you can do with it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you brought up the streaming example because I feel like some of the incumbents have, like Disney, have caught up there. They're like, hey, we have this back catalog. Why license it out to some third party?
Right.
We'll just build our own streaming platform, right? And you probably have to think about this as a founder a lot. Am I going to railroaded by a feature inside of the existing incumbent platform?
Absolutely. Brian, two things is, one is, it's not a zero-sum game. To look at both Netflix and Disney can have good businesses. And then always the fight between an incumbent and a startup comes down to whether the startup can get distribution before the incumbent can get innovation. I think the A16Z guys had said that. I think, so we're going to bet on the fact that we'll get to distribution fast.
Yeah. The distribution versus innovation. How have you measured for your architect users how much faster they are with your platform? Because you hear about anecdotes, when you're using Cursor, you're 3 to 5, maybe 10x faster as a developer.
It's early days. I don't think I could give you a credible answer to that. If you ask me that question in 6 months, I'll give you a better answer. I think we're getting a little bit more of the emotional feedback today than quantitative. So it's like you go, oh, this is so much better. Oh, thank God. But they're not telling me, well, this used to take 3 hours and I can do it in 3 minutes. There's just a sense that they are welcoming someone who's trying to do something completely new and different in this space.
Making their lives easier. Speaking of 6 months out, what does success look like for you guys as you look out 3 to 5 years?
In the short term, obviously, adoption, like we want people who love our product. Like, so say some number, pick somewhere between, not zero, but somewhere between like 25 and 100 people who are like, this is the bee's knees. Like, I love it. Like, you hear it about Figma, you hear it about Notion, you hear it about Slack. We want to be one of those companies where people say, love the thing that these guys have built. Longer term, 5 years out, we really want to feel like we changed the industry. And the way we would measure that is the next major building project you walk into, like let's say San Francisco Airport Terminal 3 is being done. We want to see that being done on our platform. Then we feel like, okay, that's success. People are betting these major projects on our platform.
Cool. Let's wrap up with let's ignite some rapid insights. I just came up with that. That's what we're going to call this segment now. It's the first time I said that, but going forward, that's what it's called. What advice would you give now to engineers working in AEC who want to build modern tools?
Can you pause on this? I mean, what I'd say is start with the problem. It's too easy to start with the technology. Everybody wants to do AI something. I think certainly you will use that, but start with a problem that people have not solved yet.
Yeah, I love that. What's a misconception people have about design software, the BIM space, that you wish more folks understood?
That it needs to be hard to use and very technical. I think that is more a reflection of how it has been implemented. I think it can be a lot easier than it is.
What past project in your career are you most proud of, and why? Then Motif, of course.
It was the cloud transformation at Autodesk, like taking a team of 3,000 people working on 60 different products and helping everyone sort of embrace the cloud and leverage it to the best of their ability. And as part of that, starting the construction business at Autodesk. It was really hard to do. It was also a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, that was quite the lift. I mean, you guys did it. Adobe did it famously.
Yeah.
Microsoft did it. Did a pretty good job as well. And
exactly. And we were early. We were early in those days. Like we were right after Adobe. We were early in the subscription transition. And the difference between them and us was they led with the business model, followed with the product. We led with the product, followed with the business.
Yeah, maybe you could tug on that thread a bit. What does that mean?
It means that Adobe started charging for desktop products in a subscription way and then started architecting the desktop products to be more cloud-centric. We started with architecting the products to be cloud-centric and then layering on the subscription model. So it was a difference. Ultimately, we both reached the same destination. But I think Adobe figured out the financial structures first. We figured out the technology first.
And which way do you think is better, or just two sides of a coin there?
It's two sides of the same coin. If you watch companies do it, they're doing both simultaneously. At that time, it was like, we had a stronger, I would say, DNA around product. Those guys had really good business sense. And so that's kind of like, we learned from them on that. They learned from us on this.
Yeah. Adobe was led by a Berkeley Haas MBA.
Exactly.
Same. If you could go back, what decision would you change in your career trajectory? Something small but meaningful.
I would take more risks sooner. I would say, and I think I came onto entrepreneurship a little too late. I think I would have started doing that a lot earlier in my career.
Yeah, I remember back in my 20s, people saying that, just take more risks. You talk to people in their 60s, 70s, what do you wish you did better? Yeah. Or you watch, life retrospectives videos on YouTube or something. And that's pretty much the number one thing that people say is, take more risks.
Yeah. I think it helps you learn faster. It's not just about the thrill of the ride. It's also that I think, you say no pain, no gain. Like in some ways, it's like entrepreneurship is equivalent to like lifting weights in the gym. Like you have to do a lot of heavy lifting to make it work. I think that's why I would say I would take more risk.
Yeah. What's a book, paper, or thought leader who has influenced how you think about building tools for makers and designers?
Look, there's a few things I've read that have really stuck with me. I do think 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, like that was one of the things that I read early on that really stuck with me. It was not about building products, but just how do you think about approaching challenges in your career. I think the biography of the Shoe Dog by Phil Knight.
Yeah, Shoe Dog,
autobiography of Nike. It's a story of just how hard this stuff is. And you look back at Nike's a huge company, you think it's instant success, but it's really so much and so many close calls. He almost he went out of business a few times and all the hustle. Like that's a really fascinating story. It just stuck with me about resilience and sticking with it. And then I think when it just comes down to the art and craft of building, there's the go-to-market stuff that Jeffrey Moore with Crossing the Chasm had come up with. Those are the books that stick with me.
Yeah. How do you stay close to users and firms while pushing for ambitious, disruptive innovation?
Some of it is just making time for it, Brian. I mean, it's like, what I enjoy learning. So in this particular project, the thing that I enjoy doing the most is just hearing and asking an architect, like, what are you working on? And they'll tell me about some stadium or community center or museum they're working on. And from there, you start getting sort of like, okay, what happened here? What's your challenge? I think I try very hard to sit in their context first, rather than how are you using software to design buildings? Like that is an awkward conversation. You just start with the thing that comes naturally. You can lead to better places. 1, I make time. 2, I'm curious about their day And then, yeah, I think you just have to learn this instinct of going between 5,000 feet and 50,000 feet. Like you have to be flex between both of those heights if you want to do the right thing.
So if and when Motif succeeds, what will be the metric that surprises people that some others aren't anticipating?
Number of users. I do believe that, people think building design software is used by a niche group of people. I think the huge opportunity here is to blow the doors open and think about touching all of the millions of people that interact with structures that is not. Or I'd like to be the first 100 million user company in the world of building design software.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. I learned a ton about this space. Where can folks find you online?
One, they can write me at amar.hanspal@motif.io. My Twitter handle is at Amar Hanspal. Either way. And then on LinkedIn, of course.
Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me. This was fun.